Peppa Pig. The Dark Night. One evening, Peppa's family was getting ready for bed. The wind howled outside, and the sky was covered in dark clouds. "What a creepy wind," Mummy Pig said, closing the curtains. "I'm not scared at all," Peppa declared, trying to sound brave. Daddy Pig chuckled. "Well then, good night, Peppa." But the night would be far from peaceful. Peppa woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she heard a faint whisper. "Peppa, Peppa." She got out of bed and looked out the window. There was no one outside, only the swing in the yard, swaying slowly on its own. Feeling uneasy, Peppa decided to check if everything was okay. She tiptoed through the house and noticed that George's door was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, she saw George sitting on the floor. His face was hidden in shadow, and his toys were arranged in a strange circle. "George, what are you doing?" Peppa asked. George slowly lifted his head. His eyes looked dark, and his voice sounded hollow. "Playing." A chill ran down Peppa's spine. Returning to her room, Peppa heard a noise coming from the living room. She crept downstairs and saw the television had turned on by itself. Strange, blurry images flickered on the screen. Suddenly, the screen went black, and a familiar voice came from the speakers. "Why aren't you asleep, Peppa?" It was Daddy Pig's voice, but it sounded unnatural, as if someone was imitating him. The next morning, Peppa's family acted strangely. Mummy Pig silently prepared breakfast, and Daddy Pig stared out the window without moving. When Peppa asked if everything was okay, they replied in unison, "Everything's fine, dear." George barely spoke. His toys were now always arranged in the same circle Peppa had seen during the night. Later that evening, Peppa heard whispering again. This time it came from outside her bedroom door. She opened it slowly and saw her entire family standing in the hallway, staring at her. Their faces were blank, with distorted smiles. "Peppa, it's time for bed," they said in unison. Peppa backed away, but her parents and George began moving toward her. Their shadows stretched along the walls, growing enormous and menacing. "Why are you acting like this?" Peppa screamed. Mummy Pig stepped closer and said, "Now you'll be just like us." Peppa Pig, the new friend. One sunny morning, Peppa and George were playing in the garden when a strange piglet approached them. He had pale gray skin, odd eyes with a reddish tint, and a quiet, muffled voice. "Hi, I'm Simon," he said with a smile. "Hi, Simon." "Do you want to play with us?" Peppa asked cheerfully. Simon nodded, but his smile seemed a little off to Peppa. George also looked uneasy, but they decided Simon was just their new friend. At first, they played harmless games. Simon suggested hide and seek, but chose the strangest hiding places, like behind the trees where no one ever hid. When George tried to find him, he suddenly heard a whisper behind him, even though Simon should have been far away. "It's just a game," Simon said, stepping out from the shadows. By evening, things got even stranger. Simon asked to stay for dinner, and Mummy Pig invited him to join. "Are you from the next village?" Mummy Pig asked. "I'm from far away," Simon replied quietly, not taking his eyes off his plate. During dinner, he hardly ate, and instead stared at everyone, especially Peppa. After the family went to bed, Peppa noticed Simon still standing in the garden, staring at the house. The next day, Simon came back. He started inviting Peppa and George to play unsettling games. One game was called Look into the Dark. Simon led them into a dark corner of the shed and said, "Look closely. You'll see something interesting." But instead of something fun, Peppa felt a chilling cold, and Simon's shadow in the darkness seemed to move on its own. One evening, Peppa heard whispering outside her bedroom door. She cautiously peeked out and saw Simon standing in the hallway. His eyes were now glowing red. "Peppa, come with me. We'll be best friends forever," he whispered. Terrified, Peppa called for her parents, but when they arrived, Simon was gone. The next day, George disappeared. All they found was his toy dinosaur, abandoned in the garden. Simon appeared again and said, "Don't worry, he's with me. He's happy." Peppa realized Simon wasn't a friend, but something far more sinister. She tried to make him leave, but he just smiled and said, "You're next." Endless room. After dinner, Peppa and George go up to their room. It's an ordinary evening. Toys are scattered around, the nightlight glows warmly, and the window shows nothing but darkness. They go to bed, unaware that the morning will bring something strange. When Peppa wakes up, she stretches and walks to the door. But as she opens it, she freezes. Behind the door is their room. Everything is exactly the same. The beds, the toys, the window with dim morning light. She blinks, trying to make sense of it. She steps back and wakes George. Together they try again. But behind the door is still their room. Over and over they open the door, but they never leave. They only enter the same space again and again. At first it seems like a silly game, but soon the fun turns into unease. The objects in the room are just slightly off. The bed sheets are rumpled in a way they don't remember. A toy that was on the floor is now on the shelf. The windows show nothing but a gray, endless void. No sun, no street, no sky. They search for a way out, opening the closet, checking under the beds, looking behind the curtains. It's useless. The space is closed in on itself. The clock ticks, but time feels strange. It never really becomes daytime or nighttime. The light remains the same, frozen in a single moment of morning. In one of the rooms, the beds are empty, yet the sheets are still dented, as if someone just got up. Peppa notices something unsettling. Every time they enter a new room, tiny details change. The toys are slightly rearranged. The wardrobe is now slightly open when it wasn't before. In one mirror, Peppa's reflection lags behind by a fraction of a second. Eventually, something like nighttime arrives. The light dims, but not completely. They lie down, deciding to wait until morning. But sleep brings no relief. When they wake up, everything is exactly the same. Their attempts to escape continue, but soon they lose track of how much time has passed. Day fades into night without a setting sun. And then, in one of the rooms, their reflections are gone from the mirror. And then, for the first time, the door opens by itself. But beyond it, there is no new room. There is only an endless black void. This series was lost and never shown on TV. Peppa Pig, the room that wasn't there. The day in the Pig family's house was as usual. Peppa and George were playing in the living room while Mummy Pig was cooking dinner and Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Everything was familiar, cozy. But in the evening, something strange happened. When Peppa went upstairs to her room, she noticed a door at the end of the hallway. It had never been there. The house wasn't that big, and Peppa knew exactly where everything was. At the end of the hallway, there had always been just a wall, but now there was a door. Ordinary-looking, wooden, with a round handle. George followed her, looking confused. A cold feeling settled inside Peppa. Maybe Mummy and Daddy had remodeled something. Maybe it had always been there and she just hadn't noticed. But the longer she stared, the more wrong it seemed. She had never heard anyone building anything new. And yet, the door was there. It was calling to be opened. Peppa cautiously reached for the handle. Inside was a room, empty, bare walls, a dusty wooden floor. But the air inside was heavy, stale, as if no one had stepped inside for a very, very long time. Peppa took a step forward. Silence. But there was a feeling like someone was there, like someone had just been standing in that corner, and moved the moment she entered. George tugged at her hoof, but Peppa didn't move. Something was wrong. They couldn't hear the television from the living room. They couldn't hear their parents' footsteps, only silence. And then, a step. Peppa turned sharply, but the room was empty, complete suffocating stillness. And then, the door began to close, slowly, soundlessly, as if someone was pushing it from the other side. Peppa and George lunged for the exit, but too late. The door slammed shut. Darkness. The room had no window, no drafts, not even a crack of light. Only absolute darkness and silence. Peppa yanked at the handle. It wouldn't budge. George curled into a ball, clutching his dinosaur tightly. And then Peppa heard breathing. Deep. Quiet. Not hers, not George's. Someone else was in this room. Something was standing in the dark, very close.